Hello everyone. Good afternoon. We'll be starting the session within few minutes, 1 or 2 minutes. Hello everyone. A very good afternoon, all of you. So a warm welcome to everyone from Google Cloud Developer Community, GDG Cloud Indore. Hope you all are doing good. Stay home, stay safe. So we are hosting this event in collaboration with GDG Indore and WTM Indore. My name is Akash and I am a co-organizer of GDG Cloud Indore. So it's the third part of our Firebase StudyJam 2020. So in this session, we would be covering building the apps quickly with Firebase. So Firebase is nowadays quite popular. Lots of companies are migrating to Firebase. So what are the properties of Firebase? It provides real-time synchronization, OAuth integration, cloud functions, ML Kit, Google Analytics, performance monitoring, and many more. So I would like to invite our speaker, Mr. Lim Shang Yi. He is a senior software engineer at Hubble, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. So he mainly works with HTML5, Angular, Java, and TypeScript. And also he's a Google developer expert in Firebase. So over to you, Mr. Shang.
Hi everyone. Hello. Hi, I'm Shang Yi. You can call me Shang Yi or Lim, regardless, which is fine. So yeah, I'm a software engineer at Hubble. Actually, at that moment, I'm working a lot on React Native. We do use some Firebase tools as well in Hubble projects. So you can find me on Twitter at this link. So off to my screen. So yeah, let's get started. So Firebase mission is to help you as a developer to succeed. And developers here doesn't mean just apps, but software developers in general. So if you're a mobile developer or you're a cross-platform developer, or if you are a native or you're a web developer, right? Firebase has the ability to help you develop really awesome apps. So Firebase actually is Google's client-side application. So client-side development application platform where you can build your apps easily and so much faster compared to ways of doing it. And Firebase is open to small, is also useful for to small or big apps in general. Doesn't have to be a startup app. It can be integrated in a lot of successful enterprise level apps. And Firebase is able to succeed in this area by actually breaking down the problems most developers have trying to get apps to market, or trying to get products to market that is working flawlessly, smoothly, without any issues. So Firebase has break down all of these problems that developers has faced and came out with a way to get that easier done for developers. So you can focus on building your features rather than thinking how to get infrastructure sorted out. So today we're going to go through three portions here. One is how you can build faster and easier apps. And then we will later on go through how you can improve your app just after building it, and how you can get more users to your app as well. So let's take a look at a typical app developer, right? Or you are someone who just started trying to learn how to build apps, or you're a seasoned developer who has always built apps but want to see a different way of doing it. Whereas here, this is one way you can take a look at. Or you're also a developer who already has apps in the market that works fine, that doesn't need migration, but I want to look at what tools you can use to increase your user base and try to track performance as well. So as a developer or as a person, I just want to create my dream app. So what needs to be done? So typically, if we take a look at what you want to build, right, you would need to look at all of these things. So you have your basic app, your mobile app, and your app works fine, but this is all the other infrastructure that you need to get built in total. So let's say you want to build a very simple app that focuses on trying to organize data between your friends or between users. These are the minimum amount of work that you need to do in order to get your app to market, right? So you as an app developer, you want to focus on building features for your app alone, but now you have to take a look at all the extra stuff you need to build. You need to build your backend servers. You need to add how do you make sure your backend is secure? How do you make sure your database is secure? Everything has to be done. A lot of work, background work has to be done in order to get it sorted, right? So let's take a look at what Firebase has to offer. So Firebase has seen all these challenges that developers face and built a series of features that you can use as the developer in order to get your app to market as soon as possible. So we have authentication, we have hosting, cloud functions, all of this that we will go through later on. And after building these apps, if you just want to look at how to improve your app quality, we can take a look at how you can use Crashanlysitic or Test Labs or app distribution to improve your workflow in your organization, or to improve your app quality itself. And we of course have products to help you engage and grow your user base. So let's go through one by one. So Firebase is supported by a lot of common developer platforms. So your basic native Android and iOS development. So if you are a native mobile developer, there is a full support for features on iOS and Android. If you're a web developer or just want to try out Firebase and development in the simplest way, I would recommend web. So web has a lot of features that you can use Firebase for, but there are some areas where web has not caught up to the mobile areas yet. And we have, of course, C++ and Unity support as well. So if you're developing games and you want to keep like a high score count or a user integration, you can take a look at the Unity integration that is provided, right? So as an app developer, most of the time we take security for granted. So sometimes when we develop apps, we need to think of the user's safety and the security, right? So I need my app to be able to authenticate users and manage role and permissions. So I want some users to be able to see or use these features in app. Some roles can only do this and that. Guest roles can only view, for example. And this is a pretty common use case in a lot of apps nowadays, right? You would need to have some way of logging in to keep track of your users. So how can you do it easily? So Firebase itself has an authentication product which is totally free. You can use it. So Firebase Auth is actually a identity as a service, and it provides out of the box authentication for you that you can use immediately. If you're on the web, you can actually have a out of the box Firebase UI toolkit that you can immediately include all the buttons. You don't need to no, you don't need to have to render them yourself or add them manually. And it supports lots of different providers. So your most basic username and password, email and password feature is inbuilt in for you. If you need to use social logins like Google or Facebook, you can use them as well. And if you like to go and do phone verification, if your app needs to be able to verify the phone number as a valid number so that you can call them up, you call your users up at the end of the day when there's a support issue or you want to receive OTPs, which is a great way to get started as well. So in most of the time, this works well for new apps that you want to build, right? But how about existing apps? How about existing apps that already have your own built-in authentication? So let's say you have an enterprise app that runs on OAuth already, but you want to use some of Firebase features and you want to use it to manage roles and permission. Firebase Auth actually also supports custom authentication on the backend, so you can include custom auth tokens that is generated on the backend on your enterprise backend and send it over as well. So Firebase Auth is pretty much very flexible in this case. Now, Firebase Auth itself is really secure. Reason being, this is a provider that is built into Google's security module. So all of this is pretty much secure. And one thing you can also, if you want to support multiple different providers as well, they can be tied together with a single user, but you have to manage them yourself. But by just using Firebase Auth itself, you can easily secure your data from external and unauthorized use. So let's take a look at an example where how Firebase Auth helps you in this case. So imagine you have 4 different users who want to access some sort of data in Firebase. And we know that the 4th user should not be able to access it because he is not registered or he does not have the admin privileges or some sort of role privileges in order to access this information. So Firebase Auth allows you to control how you can retrieve data on the cloud level by using Firebase security rules on Firestore or Realtime database. So you can use this Firebase authentication as a great way to manage your roles. And of course, the next thing you want to look at is that our apps need to be able to retrieve data, right? I mean, most app developers will need to display, retrieve, save, and update data as you go. And of course, if you're just starting up, you would then need to build your own database, right? Like I've said earlier on, you need to have a REST API that connects from your mobile app or your web app to the backend server. And then you will need a database connection. And then you will need to handle queries from a relational database point of view or non-relational database point of view. And you need to write queries to get them from your backend, and you need to make sure they scale so that 1,000 people reading the same data or writing data should not affect the performance of your app. So as developers, we always want to be able to retrieve our data as fast and scalable, right? In order to make your app look more polished, look more reliable. So what does Firebase has to offer in this case? Let's take a look at one of them, which is Cloud Firestore. So Cloud Firestore is a SQL database that allows you to have basic queries in order for you to get direct data access. So this is one way that you can use Firestore for. It is running on a NoSQL environment, so it's not a relational database structure, but it's a document collection structure. So in that way, Firestore is definitely faster to retrieve data compared to a very basic relational database. And you don't even need to host this yourself. Everything is hosted on Google servers. And what's best is that it actually also, most of the SDKs actually include the ability to handle offline handling and auto scaling. So let's talk a bit about what this means, right? So offline handling, most of the time when we use apps, whether it's mobile or web, especially more prevalent in the mobile space, is that connection can be a bit wonky, right? Sometimes the connection can drop off. Sometimes it can be a really bad connection. And most of the time, app developers, you will need to handle these scenarios like we need to check to make sure that the internet is present before we send data over to Cloud Firestore. And if there's no data, what you need to do and all the stuff. So the Cloud Firestore SDK that is provided allows you to easily do that for you. So you don't really need to handle offline by default. So you can just can save data directly on the database. Although you have no connection, it will do a local save on your local. And once a database connection is present, the data is automatically synced as well. And Firestore itself runs a few ways of trying to get your data as fast as possible. So you don't have to worry about handling load between one user versus 10,000 users, because Firestore itself is designed to handle that kind of load. So besides Cloud Firestore, we also have real-time database, right? So what's the difference between real-time database and Cloud Firestore? So real-time database itself is stored differently. The data is stored differently. It's stored in a JSON tree. So if I need to have if you're comfortable with running large JSON nodes, you can use the real-time database for it. And itself also has real-time updates. So real-time updates is useful here if you want to build some sort of app that requires real-time feedback from the server. So for example, chatting apps, you want to be able to receive data as fast as possible, or collaborative tool apps like whiteboards and stuff like that, collaborative whiteboards. And you need data to be reflected immediately without refreshing the page or without swiping here and there. You want data to return to you as fast as possible and as intuitive as possible. That's one way you can use it for. And you also have offline handling and persistent support. So persistent support here means the ability for you to actually open the app and still see data inside, even though there's no data connection established. So you don't need to handle your database layer if you need to create a local database in your app. This is one way that you can allow the data to be shown even though there's no internet connection. So speaking of real-time updates, the Firestore itself also has real-time updates, but not as frequent as the real-time database. So this updates once per second, if I'm not wrong, once every 3 seconds, I think. And this updates almost immediately. So if you need to build a feature that relies a lot on the real-time functionality, that you need high responsiveness, low latency, which is one way you can do it. If you don't really need it for that kind of performance, the Cloud Firestore is much more better way to store data, in my opinion, compared to real-time database, due to it being in a JSON tree, right? So JSON trees can be really long and complicated, and it's better to write in Firestore since data is more organized in a document and a collection structure. So collections are like tables and documents are like rows. So you can create a lot of different collections and a lot of different rows to the collection. So most of the time, your app, you will need if you need an app functionality, for example, I want to be able to upload documents, right? My app needs to be able to upload photos. My app needs to be able to upload attachments, and then other people can actually retrieve them and do something with them. And if you were to do this yourself on a normal backend without Firebase, you'll of course need to decide where to store your data, whether you want to store it on the server or you want to store it on a different cloud. You want to store it in an S3 bucket or some other third-party buckets. So this is one of the few challenges that developers always face where they want to store, where they can store data. Should you be storing data in databases? The general rule is not to be that. You don't want to store blobs in databases because that can make your database really heavy and the downloading of content can be real slow. So most developers will need a way for you to upload files and photos. And let's take a look what Firebase has to offer, right? So Firebase has something called the cloud storage. So if you need the ability to upload photos or upload any sort of files, you can use cloud storage to do it for you. And of course, it scales automatically. Again, you don't really need to care about scaling here. You don't need to optimize your storage endpoints in order to fulfill a lot of different requests or huge file sizes. And storage itself, right, is also stored in replicated in around the globe in edge caches. So let's say you have an image that most users will be using in India and, for example, somewhere else like Sri Lanka, and all of this data is located replicated across the edge servers. So you can actually retrieve data much faster. So users in Sri Lanka are able to receive the data, able to get a copy of the same data from the nearest edge server towards them compared to, and the same time the users in India is able to do the same thing as well. So these are some of the few storage features that Firebase has to offer. And of course, cloud storage itself also handles downloading support. And what if your connection breaks? It has a resume download support as well. So this is a great way for you to get started if you really need a feature to store data and you don't really want to think of how to handle data replication, data backup, handle optimizations as how much storage should I allocate and stuff like that. So this is a really great solution for you to get started with for storage. So in most of the time, app developers or any developer in general would need to write some sort of backend code, right? We need to store code that should not be located in your front end framework. So you shouldn't have any sort of, for example, a business logic that should only be exposed on a secure environment. For example, your backend. I need some sort of code, for example, to calculate your salary range or to process sensitive data and stuff like that, right? So most developers will need some sort of way to write backend code, right? Just having databases, just having a storage solution might not be enough to fulfill most developer needs. And sometimes as developers, we might need to we need to expose APIs, right, for third-party integration. So let's say your company and another company is doing a collaboration work, or your client company that has developers as well need to able to access your data. So few things we can do is that Firebase has the ability for you to perform all of this. So how can you actually achieve this is to use cloud functions for Firebase, right? So what is actually a cloud function? So cloud functions are functions that live on the cloud. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right, based on the term cloud function. But what does this actually mean? Actually means that as a developer, you are just focused on writing the actual business logic code that you want to do. For example, I want to be able to calculate the salary of a certain employee. I just need to think of that function alone. You will typically write that in a function, maybe call it calculate salary for personnel, something like that. And you can immediately deploy this function directly on Firebase. You don't need to think of where do I put this app in, where do I put this backend code in? Do I need to put it in a Node.js app and deploy the Node.js app? No. Do I need to put it in a Java Spring app? Do I need to put it in a .NET app, J2EE app? So all of this you don't really need to figure out. So cloud function is basically just functions that lives on the cloud and you can immediately trigger them. There are two ways you can do Firebase functions. One is to use a HTTP request to create APIs, or you can do based on events. For example, I want to be able to run a certain function at the end of the day, every day to consolidate some numbers, or I want to do some sort of batch job to do something, or I want to send emails when the user has signed up or performed a certain task. You can actually do that with cloud functions. So cloud functions also again automatically scales like all Firebase product does. So a function that lives in the Google Cloud environment will spin multiple instances if needed, depending on the load, and spin down when you don't need it. So you don't have to keep an application server running somewhere all the time, even though there are no users. So so this is they only charge you based on the amount of time you spend running a particular function. So let's say within a day you only run maybe 10 functions and you only get charged on that amount. And sometimes on a more peak time you will only run 20 functions and you will get charged then. So this is a great way to keep your costs down by preventing your apps from always turning on, always being on all the time, even though there are no or low traffic users. So with that out of the way, there are some ways that as app developers, I want to quickly sort out some features, right? For example, as an app developer, I want to send a welcome email every time a new user has been created, or you want to create and send an email when a person creates their first order. Or sometimes you are building an app that heavily relies on pictures, and you rely on users to upload a lot of pictures, and you want to be able to show a list of these photos, such as, for example, Instagram as thumbnails. It will be a way you can try to do that functionality. So you will need to have some sort of way to do thumbnailing if needed, because you want to keep the bytes low, right? Send over the network, and people can see lots of different photos at one shot. And sometimes if you're building an app that need to be compliant with some sort of a Data Protection Act or GDPR, how can we manage this going forward, right? So let's take a look at what Firebase has to offer. So Firebase has something new called Firebase Extension, which is currently in beta. It was launched last year and middle of last year. So Firebase extensions are pre-packaged solutions that help you as developers save time. You don't need to build them from scratch. You can just plug them in as plugins and use them immediately. So let's take a look at some fun extensions that is provided for you at this time. So we have the ability, if you need to do any thumbnailing, to do resizing, you can just click install, fit in some configuration, and you're done. Now, all your photos that you uploaded to Cloud Firestore is immediately resized for you. If I need to do some sort of translating work, like I want to click on this button when users send a chat message, I want to be able to translate immediately, you can just use this function. If I want to send emails after user has performed some sort of function, you can use the trigger email plugin. So these are some of the plugins that you can use. If these plugins do not suffice, you want to build your own functions, you can always go back to Cloud Functions and build them manually yourself. So let's take a look at some other areas. So let's say you have built an website, right? And you want to deploy this website and let everyone see. So you build a really cool shopping app, for example, and you want to let everyone use, especially during the COVID season, a lot of new e-commerce websites are popping up. You want to be able to make sure that your users are able to get to your website regardless of the load of users, right? So also, security is important, and our site minimum has to be able to support SSL. And how can we do that in Firebase is that Firebase has something called a Firebase Hosting. So Firebase Hosting allows you to host client-sided web apps, for example, Angular, React, Vue, or just plain old JavaScript, CSS, HTML apps in general. You can easily host them on Firebase Hosting. So you have all of these files, and you can just one command to just deploy them on your Firebase hosting itself. And once they are deployed, you can immediately use them, send out links to these URLs, and people can access them. So Firebase hosting runs on a production grade, very highly available environment. So it's backed by a global CDN, and you are sure that your content can be delivered to everyone around the world. So this is one way to get quickly up to scale and up to speed, up to production, up to market easily with Firebase hosting. So bear in mind, hosting is only for web apps, client-sided web apps. So sometimes when you build apps, you may need some sort of ML feature, or sometimes your boss says that, hey, I think maybe we can take a look at including ML. And most of the time, developers such as you and me don't really know any machine learning at all. We are app developers or web developers. We don't really know anything about machine learning. And the good news is that Firebase knows that a lot of developers wants to integrate machine learning into their devices, so into their apps. So Firebase has introduced an ML kit. So it allows you to have on-device machine learning for no connection environment, or if you need high reliability, you can always go and connect it to the cloud. It has out-of-the-box APIs that you can directly use in order to do common machine learning problems. And if these problems are not sufficient for you, you can always go and start with the custom models. So some models that they provide is face recognition. You can do OCR recognition. You can do face detection, landscaping detection, as well as barcode scanning. So if your apps need some of these features, you can immediately include those SDKs in your app and you are good to go. So why is ML useful? It can be useful if you need to do a barcode scanning feature or any sort of OCR detection feature. If you want to do augmented reality stuff like overlaying stuff onto a person's face, you can use it as well. And you can always do other kind of use cases by using custom models. So this is an example that we have used the very standard Firebase ML kit to detect your faces, and you can use that to overlay it on top. So the next thing is that after you've done building your app, your app will great, but now I want to make sure my app has less errors, right? The most important thing about apps is to make sure that they function well in high quality. So let's take a look at some of these features that Firebase has to offer. So we have so Firebase has something called a Crashanlysitic. So certain times as app developers, when we build apps, right, crashes are bound to happen regardless of whether we have figured out how many scenarios or how we have tested the app. Crashes are bound to appear. So we want these crashes to be immediately notified as fast as possible so that you can easily work on it. You don't want to wait for your Play Store reviews to come back and say 1 star because this doesn't work, that crashes once you open and stuff like that. So Firebase Crashanlysitic allow you to include monitoring and real-time reporting, so that when you ship your app, you get immediate feedback from the users without them having to let you know on the Play Store. And you can get all of these metrics directly and figure out which line is causing a crash and all of the information you want. So you get all the stack trace and logs that helps you as a developer to reactively, to instinctively quickly look for issues and quickly produce a next version of app or fix the app as soon as possible. And that way you can increase the quality of your apps. And of course, besides making sure your app doesn't crash, we want to make sure that your app is performing greatly. We don't want we want to see which users are getting slow results from, and we can always take a look at all of these metrics that's provided to you by Firebase Performance, and it will let you know where is the problematic area, which users are being affected, and what sort of code is causing some sort of problematic behaviors, right? So can use this way to trace performance in your app. The next thing is that Firebase Test Lab. So we have an app, we want to do a lot of testing. How can we do testing? So Firebase Test Lab has a lot of devices sitting somewhere in the Google data centers where you can actually deploy your APK directly, and you can specify which devices for it to run. That way it runs on an automatic robot crawler that intelligently looks for things that they can press. Of course, you can of course tweak this implementation by making sure that there are certain labels that you can press to make it work much more effectively. And this is one way you can use to make sure your app works in different devices. And besides that, there's a lot more features that I won't cover. You can take a look at them later on. And of course, what we want to make sure our app can retain users and grow extra users, right? So how can we do that with Firebase itself? So Google Analytics is a great way for you to understand how your users work in your app. So Google Analytics allows you to track whether the users are actually using a particular feature. You've built a feature and you're not sure whether users are actually using it. How are they using the features? You can actually get them logged so that you can roughly plot a user journey of how users are using your app. And all of this can be analyzed, and you can segment your users based on this analytics information. So it's a really powerful tool for you to bring data to the management or bring data to your user interface people to say, hey, I think this flow can be fixed, can be improved further on, because look at how the users are using your app in this kind of manner. So Google Analytics is a very powerful way you can use to test your users who are using your app. And of course, we have Firebase Cloud Messaging. This is most common feature used in a lot of apps nowadays. So any sort of push notification that you see mostly are on cloud messaging itself. So if you need to be able to implement push notification on web or on your Android devices or your iOS devices, you can easily do that. Of course, with Firebase Analytics, you can actually customize who can receive your messages easily, or targeted users. So I can send some messages, a particular group of users who do not use the app often. You can maybe send them a nudge, All users will always use the app often to give them discounts and stuff like that. So these are some ways that you can engage your users and to bring them more closer to your app itself. So another thing that Firebase has that a lot of companies are using are remote configuration. So for example, you have an app that you want to be able to configure some features remotely even after the app has been published to the Play Store. So maybe you want to configure, okay, a certain set of users are going to do dark mode, and certain users are going to use white mode, or some users are going to use a bigger font size. You can use Firebase Remote Config to configure these options on the fly, and they will receive them updated immediately. So allows you to update your app behavior remotely without actually requiring to re-upload another copy on the Play Store. So this way you can segment your users and determine which users love the app. So maybe you can turn on some sort of experimental feature and send it to just a few group of people and see whether they're using it. If they don't really like it, you can turn it on a different way. And now you know those features are what users like, and you can keep them on all the time. So with that in mind, we are going back and take a look at all the features that Firebase has to offer. So these are a lot more extra features that you can take a look at in both all these areas. So let's take a look at some ways for you as a developer to get started, right? If you have not known Firebase for any time and you want to get started quickly, you can always go to the code labs itself. So just go to, this is a code lab to get started with Firebase for web. It's a step-by-step walkthrough. And if you are familiar with Firebase and you want to try out the Firebase extensions, you can always go to this link and learn how you can integrate the thumbnail extension inside the test app. You can use this to, maybe you can test it out and see how it works. And if you're interested in learning Firebase and what Firebase has to offer, you can always check out the Firebase docs, right? So you can go to this link. So I guess you can always, of course, check out the google.dev link. So let me just show you that. And if you're interested to know more about google.dev tools, you can always use, take a look at this. So if you're interested in google.dev, they have a lot of different things that you can take a look. So you can always try out their pathway and code lab in order to learn more about Firebase. So yeah, with that in mind, I think thank you everyone for joining the live stream. I will be here to answer any questions. So I do see some questions from the live stream. Can you all still hear me, because it's raining pretty badly over here? So the first question I have is from David. Where should I use real-time database and where to use Firestore? So my general rule is that use Firestore first most of the time, because it provides you a lot of benefits out of the box. For example, much better querying support, much better organization of data. So most of the time you will tend to use Cloud Firestore for most of your work. If you are new, I would always 100% recommend Firestore first. And if you think that it does not just work for you, you can always revert back to the real-time database. So what are the use cases you would use real-time database? So for example, you want to build a whiteboard app where a lot of collaborators are working on the same whiteboard. Real-time database is a great way to get started because data is synced on all clients really fast. So if you just need to solve very simple JSON node structure in your app, like app settings that you think are small and lightweight, you can just go ahead and put it on real-time database also. So another thing we can also take a look at is the costing structure. So the costing structure for Firebase real-time database and Firestore is different. I think let's take a look at the pricing. So before deciding to use either, maybe we can take a look at pricing in general, right? So in pricing, at the free tier, you can see that you allow 50K reads per day or 20K document reads writes per day. So in my experience, this should be enough for every day, and you most of the time you actually won't get charged. If you really have a lot of users, the next costing would be actually at, let me just take a look at this tab. It's much easier to take a look at things. So Cloud Firestore itself, right? For for the next 100K read writes, you only cost you 18 cents USD. So it's, as long as you design your database properly, you won't actually use up so much of this. So this is a pretty decent strategy. If you're having 100K of writes in your database, I'm sure your users are plenty, and I don't think this amount is a problem for you. So if you look at real-time database, real-time database doesn't actually charge by the number of reads, but instead they charge based on the number of concurrent connections. So if you have 200 people connecting the database at one shot, if you're on the Blaze plan, you get it for free. But if you're on the free plan, you get 100 reads, 100 simultaneous connections, and they don't charge based on read and writes. So if you have a small amount of data that you need to deliver to users all the time in a very large mode, I would suggest you to store that data in real-time database, and any structured document that may be retrieved sometimes or on different pages, then I would suggest you to use Cloud Firestore. So the next question we have is, can you tell more about Firestore? And I think that's pretty much the same question. So let's take a look at functions itself. Some people ask about cold start functions. So cold start problem is a prevalent problem in cloud functions, not just Google Cloud Functions, but AWS Lambdas as well. So why does cloud cold start happen? So just to give you a bit of a context of what cold start is that, for example, you have a function that runs all the time, right? For example, it does a very simple function. For example, calculate cart price. For example, it calculates the total amount of price that the user has to pay once they add all the items to cart and want to check out the cart, for example. And most of the time, if you have a lot of users using your app, the cold start will not be an issue. So what happens when the user clicks on checkout button, or they click the checkout button, is it will then trigger a cloud function. And if the cloud function has never been loaded before, it will run a Node.js at the back automatically for you, and then it will start that app up, and then it will side load your function into the Node.js app. So most of the time, it is pretty quick. There are certain times it can take up to 6 or 10 minutes. The reason why this happens is because people don't use the function anymore for a certain period of time. So if your app uses the function all the time, almost maybe once, maybe in maybe 10 or half an hour, you can be sure that the cold start can be quite less. But if you're using the functions like once a day, the cold start problem can happen. So how can we actually solve this problem, right? There's only ways to actually reduce the cold start problem. You cannot eliminate it from the system. So what you can do is that you can actually write a scheduled function that can ping the function maybe every few seconds. Like every 1 second, you hit it once and you return the function immediately. That way, you keep the function alive and the container is open for you with that function always live, so it doesn't have to start from scratch. It doesn't have to boot a Node.js environment or Express.js environment and sideload your functions into it. So that is one way you can actually take a look at how you can use scheduling function. So let me just show you a scheduled function. Right, function. So let me just search. So one way you can do is, of course, to schedule your functions. You can execute this piece of code that runs every 5 minutes. All right. So you can use that and you can hit your original endpoint if you need to. And that way you can try to keep it alive if you want to do that. If you do not want to use a scheduled way of doing things, you can always move your functions and put it in a compute engine and let it run. Of course, that will cost you more because you now need to keep, you are now paying for keeping the function alive all the time. So this is one way you can handle code starts. So let's move on. Is there any way to import data from MySQL to Firestore and Firebase Auth? So if you want to migrate data from MySQL to Firestore, you first need to take a look at a few things. How do you want to structure your data in Firestore? Because Firestore runs on a document and a collection setting. So you will need to write your own script to convert them into that manner, and then you can actually load the entire thing into Firebase Realtime Cloud Firestore by importing data. So there is a way for you to import data. So if you take a look at the Firebase documentation, you can actually use this to import the data. So what you will need to do, you have to write some sort of script to convert your MySQL or database data into Firestore format, and then you can upload it on cloud storage, and then you can import it directly based on the bucket itself. So that's one way you can do it. Is Firebase good for storing huge amount of data? So the Firebase storage is actually quite good at doing it because it really expects that kind of data. So you can actually use the can always use the the storage to help you out. And I would actually recommend you to use this if you want to store user data. Most of the time, if you are going to store assets, like frequently used assets, I would recommend you not to put it there. But if you want to put it there, you can actually include the headers. So if you can add cache control headers in order to make sure it's available for a very long period of time to keep it in your cache, in your browser's cache, you can actually use cloud storage to do that for you. And the next one is so hosting has a limited bandwidth of 10 gigs. Any tips how to save bandwidth? So how do we save bandwidth? There's a few suggestions you can do. The reason why bandwidth can be an issue is because of your bundle size itself. So if you have your JavaScript framework, front-end framework, for example, an Angular project or React project or a Vue.js project, you can take a look at their documentations and how to reduce the amount of bundles if possible. Another way is to always cache your data. So you can actually, if I'm not wrong, you actually can write caching rules as well on hosting. So you can, of course, utilize service workers. This is all not really related to hosting in general, but more like trying to keep your bundle size low and reduce bandwidth. You can always use service workers to cache your bundles when necessary, so that people don't actually need to fetch the entire bundle from Firebase Hosting and just load it from your phone itself. So you can take a look at your favorite framework documentation and how to reduce that amount of bandwidth. To Firebase also give a question by Siddharth. To Firebase also give the facility if I created a database in Firebase storage and will give it in graph. So Firebase itself, let's talk about Firebase storage. Data itself from Firebase is not written in a graph format. It's written, it is very similar to graph format, but it does not provide the abilities of for example, a GraphQL way of getting data. So let me just show you what I mean by that. So we can actually get data that you specifically need. For example, I just want to get very single document, but you cannot control what fields you want to get from the document. This actually will return you a JSON of the document itself. So how would the JSON look like? So the example data would be something like this. So it's a JSON structure on its own. So if you were to get the data, you will get the data in this format. But if you want to get it in a graph-like manner where you want to select only the fields you want to get, unfortunately, that is not possible for both real-time database and Cloud Firestore. However, in Firestore, you can limit the amount of data that you can retrieve. For example, you don't need to query the entire collection in order to get specific data. If you know the key, you can immediately query out. And of course, there are some other ways that you can use Firestore for. For example, let me just... So Firestore also allows you to get data by groups. So let's see whether is it somewhere listed here. So in Firestore, there's something called a group query. For example, you have a lot of landmarks, right? Like all of this, we have from San Francisco, we have add a few landmarks here and there, and we have put them a type of bridge or museum, right? So if I need to be able to access the data, you can use the collection group itself to immediately jump to what you need. So for example, I want all landmarks of type museum. You can easily do that by accessing all the collections in all these collections itself live inside a document. So imagine you have a collection called cities, and inside the cities, there's another collection called landmark. So one city has many landmarks, and these landmarks is located in every document. So in order for me to get all the landmarks, regardless of what city you are getting, you can actually use group queries to bypass the city's collection and jump straight to the landmark collection. So this is one way you can use it for. It is of course not a replacement for graph, and the short answer is no, it doesn't actually replace graph, or you do it in a graph-like manner. Can you use test labs for iOS development? I only tested on Android, but yes, there is ability for you to do it on iOS. So you just take a look at the document. Based on this document, it seems that something that you can do. You can use it for iOS. So yeah, just check out the documentation in order to try that out. By Rohan, I'm not familiar with the error you are talking about. So probably you can ping me later on and maybe we can see more detail what this set timeout error actually comes from. most of the case, it may be a problem with the React Native library for Firebase. Maybe you can post an issue there and see whether they have it sorted. Can you use your own SSL for your web app? Not that I know of, no. You can use their built-in SSL that is provided, and then you can connect a custom domain over. Let me just double check on whether you can actually use a custom SSL. I don't think so. So we do allow you to set up your custom domain. I don't think the SSL. I guess a custom domain might help you achieve that. Maybe you can attach your SSL on your custom domain itself, and somehow it will work. But I'm not very sure about this actually. If you want to fetch anything from database instead of key defined means want to fetch anything from database instead from key defined means any other field in the. Okay, so I think what you mean is that how are we able to get data besides using the key, right? You can actually take a look at the querying of data. So in this section, there's something you can perform simple queries. So I think what you mean is that the ability for you to query things based on other fields besides the key, right? Or get data besides the key, right? So take, for example, you have a document, the key name here is SF, and you have a few fields, right? So you have name, state, country. Let's say I want to be able to get all the cities that are of state California, CA. You can actually do that by just using a where condition, and this query return you a collection of a list of cities that match this condition. So you can get more than one if there are more than one documents matching your filter criteria. So I guess that's the questions for now. I hope I'm able to answer your questions. So I guess that's it. I'm passing it back to you.
Yeah, so hello everyone. Hope you enjoyed the session. I would like to thank all the people for attending the session. Special thanks to Mr. Lim for such a wonderful session on Firebase. Looking forward to see you again. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for having me. You can always search for me on Twitter on the first slide. So yeah, see you guys in the future. So I guess that's it. Bye bye.